Welcome to Everyday Christianity, where we explore how the principles of Christianity impact our everyday lives. Join us as we delve into the timeless wisdom of the Bible, applying its principles to build stronger relationships, find purpose in our careers, nurture thriving families, and deepen our connection with God.
Hey, welcome back to Everyday Christianity. I'm Steve Wood. I'm the lead pastor at Mount Pisgah Methodist Church. And we are here today to continue the conversation of how we can learn how to practically apply scriptural truth that's both inspiring and freeing and aids us in our journey with Christ and in our relationship with other people, family, friends, coworkers, in sharing the good news of the gospel. I'm joined today by Ray and Dwayne and Joel, and we're going to do kind of a takeoff now on the follow-up from the previous broadcast where we talked about the issue of pride and beginning to own it. And so now we want to move more practically in terms of really giving you some things maybe you can sink your teeth into or latch on to practically apply on how to address tactically moving beyond it. And certainly one of those things is a willingness for self-reflection, self-assessment, and for us to really see things the way they are rather than through the lens of our own projection. So Dwayne's got a great verse, comes from Paul's letter to Romans chapter 12. And Dwayne, I'm going to ask you to share that with us today.
I'll be reading out of the New King James Version, and Romans 12 is the section of Romans where we're told how to live the Christian life and interact with other people. So it starts up with, first thing is we've offered our body a living sacrifice, which is our true and proper worship. So we've made ourselves a sacrifice, a slave to Christ, and then we've asked to not be conformed to the pattern of the world, but be transformed through His Word, through the Spirit. And so Him working on us daily, sanctifying us. And then we get to verse 3. For I say, through the grace given to me, to everyone who is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly as God has dealt to each one a measure of faith. And to go from 1 and 2, which you think are, wow, offering myself as a sacrifice and then asking to be conformed every day, and then that's followed up with, well, you better be doing a sober self-assessment. It's just, it's a 3-part process that is really designed for every human being because it tells us how deeply this sin of pride is rooted in each one of us, and that it is a self-centeredness that we want to be there. But these are things that we can do that can help us overcome this prideful nature that the flesh that we all have. We become believers. We're slaves to Christ. We're His. We're bought with a price, and we've offered ourselves. But let's do that self-assessment. We need to look at ourselves with a right perspective, a right view of how we're carrying out our business day to day,
right,
and how we're representing Christ.
You know, you just read Romans 12, 1 and 2. They're almost like prerequisites or warm-up verses to this, because once you've given you've been a sacrifice and you've given yourself to Christ, and don't be conformed to this world. And then all of a sudden he jumps in and says, don't be proud. So you can almost have a spiritual pride of in the Christian walk. And it's so easy, even in conversation, to somehow lift yourself up. I just had this incredible quiet time, or I memorized, these 3 verses. Let me share these how they're going to make a difference in you. I mean, spiritual pride can also be a topic, that's subtle, but it's real. And thinking more highly of ourselves. I mean, we always want to value what we think is best, but we were talking about earlier before we started the podcast. I think sometimes I struggle with trying the pride of thinking somebody should be making decisions like I would make them, or doing things that I think they should do, but they're not doing. And that can be very prideful. In fact, it's kind of a practical application. I walked in today to the office. I've been gone for a couple of weeks, and they ordered some new office furniture. And as soon as I saw it, I'm like, that is not what I would have ordered. I'm very traditional.
Let it go, Ray. Let it go.
Guys.
They've been to IKEA.
Oh, my goodness. And it was like the Lord checked my spirit. I was about to say something, and I bit my tongue and said, no, this is what they want, and it's not what I want. I'm not going to be prideful and say you coulda, shoulda, woulda. And
they'll know it now after listening to this podcast.
Oh no, it's being recorded. But again, that's another level of pride that I deal with, that I think people should think like I think, and they should do things like I would do. And I'm so convicted. Yeah, this podcast was for me. But I think it's real. I think those are the things that can just tear down relationships with others. It can tear down a relationship with a spouse, because again, expectations come into a marriage, come into a family, deal with family members, and pride can really be destructive if it's not dealt with properly. So again, just kind of this broad brush of pride permeates all aspects of our lives that we may not even realize. And I remember this one consultant we work with, I remember talking to him, and he was talking about blind spots. He said, Ray, the reason you don't see this blind spot is because it's a blind spot in your life. That's pretty prophetic.
The definition.
That's pretty prophetic, but it's true. I think we have a lot of blind spots of this issue of pride in our lives, and God wants to expose it to us because he wants to heal us and humble us and do a work in our hearts.
Okay. You guys, y'all are really into it. Those are some great illustrations, and thanks for being honest and sharing. You've illustrated well Romans 12:2. Do not be conformed to this world or anything in it, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Okay, so this is where the battle is fought with the whole pride thing, because we'll get in a cycle of thinking, and then in that cycle, we'll move to inflating our own virtues, and at the same time, somehow exacerbating other people's faults. Boy, that's a position of power, but that's also the epitome of a prideful approach. And so he leans into chapter 3 there out of Romans 12. Do not think more highly of yourself than you ought. So I'm just wondering, in my devotional time, one of the practical things I try to do is when I get to that prayer and confession time, and I do try to journal, I try to stop and say, Lord, all right, help me acknowledge what I'm feeling and why. Well, I'm angry at this person because they appear to be ambivalent about something I'm passionate about, or they don't seem to be on board with what I'm trying to run with here. And so it's interesting. The Holy Spirit begins then to reveal, hey, this is all happening in your mind. This has nothing to do with displayed behavior by these other people. Your mind is projecting that somehow, some way, they're not, back to your words, they're not acting the way you expect them to act about any scenario. So, don't think more highly of yourself than you ought, but do it with sober judgment. And Lord, I guess the only sober judgment is the wisdom of the Holy Spirit at work in our lives, where we don't look through that lens of self-justification, self-aggrandizing our own accomplishments, and really ask the Lord to help us see us in our real state.
Yeah, I've probably told this somewhere along the line, but humility is something that the Lord honors, and He lifts up the humble. We heard that last podcast. But false humility is a sin. And I'll never forget my college coach, Bill Curry, told me one time someone had offered me a compliment, and I was like, no. You know, Coach Curry told me, he said, Dwayne, just say thank you. He said, when you say no, you bring more attention to yourself by doing that than you do. Just say thank you and move on and change the subject. And so why do I say that? Because it goes back to what Ray was saying about, you know, thinking things about other people, and even here in Romans in 12:16, that, you know, we're told to live in harmony. We're told to live in peace with other people. We're to associate with those of low position, the humble, and the world today doesn't necessarily do that. If you look at the things on social media, you know, everybody's trying to set their glamour, oh, this is perfect, this is great, this is the best. And obviously we know intuitively that there's a lot of stuff that's behind the scenes that nobody's seeing. But again, it goes back to that comparison thing, and we really want to avoid all that. We want to, what do you think about your neighbors? If you're thinking evil things about your neighbors, or your neighbors may not be saved. I hear people sometimes say, well, can you believe they did that? And I'm like, yeah, I can believe they did that. They're not saved. They need Christ. They need to know. But I can't believe they did. Yeah, I believe they did that. They're slaves to sin right now. So, you know, think about how you live with those around you, how you associate with people that, you know, are you gravitating to people that are more prideful and boastful? Or are you gravitating more to the humble and those who God's called us to encourage?
Wow. I think that is so fascinating. Dwayne, I think there may be a direct correlation to who we're gravitating towards that's depending upon the second discipline. The first discipline Paul mentioned is make a sober self-assessment of ourselves, self-reflection, right? But the second discipline is choosing to allow other people to speak into our life. And that has a mutual benefit that exposes pride. And, you know, anything that's kept in the darkness has power, but when it's exposed to light, then it loses its power. So people who love us enough to tell us the truth, and if we're inviting people to speak into our life, I want to propose, this is just a postulate, that we're gravitating towards people who are probably in a collaborative place of those disciplines, and the product of that is probably greater humility, not greater capitulation of the image. Last week, it was called to my attention, one of my college friends apparently had gotten some backstage passes to an incredible concert, and they had just checked in at this place and photoed them with the badges on that clearly said backstage pass at a Metallica concert. I told my kids, I said, better him than me. There's no jealousy there. I've been there. I've done that. I can't hear a lick today because of things like that. And I said, but that's just wonderful, but that's not my cup of tea.
Right.
All right. Well, then I got to thinking about even those comments were prideful. Okay.
It all goes back.
Exactly. I was thinking, oh, man. All right. I'm happy for this guy, so on and so forth. So, yeah, it's a double-edged sword.
It is. As I think more and unpack this whole issue of pride, being right or wanting to be right in all circumstances is another issue of pride. That we think we know what's best for us and for others, and extending that can be very prideful, as opposed to being, like you said, Pastor, being teachable and open to other suggestions. Because again, my tendency is I think I know this is right.
Yeah.
And that's wrong. I need to be open. There's a term we've talked about in discipleship saying, pray for someone that's faithful, available, teachable. And part of that, an acronym is teachable. I think teachable needs to divert our pride in being open to other people's suggestions and input and ideas, as opposed to thinking, no, that's fine, but this is the better choice. This is the better decision because it's coming from me and it makes sense to me. It's hard to take off those pair of glasses and look back from the other direction, because I always think that everybody else must think this the way I do. And that's wrong.
I was reminded today, I was listening to a podcast this morning, and I know who it was, Chip Ingram. Mm-hmm. And he was telling about his in-laws and how his father-in-law basically told him that they would never see them. That his father-in-law and all people around him, his advisor, long-term advisor, none of them wanted he and his wife to get married.
Yeah, I remember him telling that.
Okay, and I just thought about this. I'm like, well, wouldn't it have been better if they were praying for them and saying, Lord, and I'll do this quite often. Lord, I have no idea. And I have a very good friend, Jeff, who was in harm's way and was wanting to go back. He's 62 years old. And I'm like, he was serving in the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. Right. So I'm like, Jeff, let me tell you what I can pray for you. I'm going to pray for God's will to be done. And I'm going to pray that what's best for what God knows is best for you. I'm going to pray that's what needs to be done. I'm not going to pray for what I want for you to do, because what I want for you to do is different from what you want to do. And I'm not going to pray for yours.
Yeah.
But I will pray, and we can pray together, that God will manage this situation the way that he wants it managed. I think if we do, more of us would do that. As to answer your pride issue, is like, okay, Lord, I don't like the way this guy's doing this, but if he's wrong, change him. You change him. I'm not going to change. I'm not going to say anything to him, but you change him.
Yeah.
But if he's right, then let me know. So, I think if we step back and let Christ handle more of our situations like that, we would come from a better spot of pride.
Right. That's powerful. Mm-hmm. And a great encapsulation. Basically, two takeaways today as we close out our podcast for everyday Christianity. The first one is the power of self-reflection when we invite Christ to speak into our life and our mind and help us to see things as they really are, rather than the way we have structured them to be, mostly for our benefit. And then the other gift is taking the risk to invite other people to speak into our life as iron sharpens iron, or in a godly marriage. Oh, those are beautiful, beautiful opportunities to stay grounded and to grow in the grace and peace and humility of Jesus Christ. Hey, we commend those unto you, and we encourage you and pray for you. If we can help you, you can reach us at everydaychristianity@mountpisgah.org. And until we meet again, do not grow weary in doing well. Hey, the best news of all is that God's with us. Have a wonderful day.
If you found value in today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and share the podcast with your friends and family. For any questions or feedback, feel free to reach out to us at everydaychristianity@mountpisgah.org, and you can find all the relevant links in the show notes. Until next time, God bless.